Hey guys, let's start with the story tonight. Mara, the granddaughter of the stonekeeper on Ronan Island in the North Atlantic, went from skepticism to witness and ultimately inherited the 10,000-year pact of guarding the deep-diving shepherd, the ancient symbiont that carries the entire island. So before you get too comfortable, take a second to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see people joining us from all around the world. The autumn wind of 1923 was a knife laced with salt. Old Ellis pulled his thick woolen coat tightly around himself, his deeply wrinkled face stiffened by the sea breeze. He stood on the cliff beside the triangle stone, holding the brass telescope passed down from his grandfather. Its barrel was more tarnished with green rust than the previous year, like moss growing on metal. Through the telescope, the gray-blue waves of the North Atlantic crashed against the reefs repeatedly, shattering into splashes of white foam, and the sound drifted up from the cliff, an eternal backdrop to Ronan Island. As the island's stonekeeper, Ellis's duty was to watch over this granite boulder standing at the top of North Beach. It was so old that even the oldest resident on the island remembered it looking exactly the same when they were a child. 3 zhang wide at the base, tapering upward to a somewhat irregular triangle, like a stone wedge casually stuck in the seaside by a giant. The islanders called it the Triangle Stone or the Stone God, and Ellis's family had guarded it for generations, from their ancestors in coarse linen to him in rubber boots today. The midday sun was already faint, and now most of it was swallowed by the sea fog. Ellis put down the telescope and rubbed his sore eyes. Just then, the sound came. It was not the whimper of wind through the cliffs, nor the roar of waves pounding the reefs, let alone the shrill cry of seagulls. It came from an extremely deep and distant place, like a low-frequency hum leaking from the center of the earth as the seabed split open. The sound was not harsh, but it carried a penetrating vibration that crawled up Ellis's feet, making his teeth chatter and his chest feel as if stuffed with a damp cotton wad, heavy and stuffy. He suddenly looked up at the triangle stone. The boulder still stood silently, its dark gray surface dotted with water droplets condensed from the sea fog, just as it had every morning for the past few decades. But Ellis's heart was pounding wildly, and the vague words his grandfather had muttered on his deathbed suddenly echoed clearly in his ears. Ellis, remember to guard the stone. When the stone starts to sing, the shepherd is hungry. He had been only 10 years old then, dismissing it as the ramblings of an old man. How could a stone sing? Who was the shepherd? But now, the low-frequency hum persisted, like an ancient elegy swirling around the triangle stone and spreading across the entire island. Ellis suddenly realized that the singing his grandfather had spoken of was this very sound. He turned and walked back to the village, his steps quicker than usual. The elderly people he passed along the way, whether Mike mending fishing nets or old Martha drying seaweed, stopped what they were doing, their faces pale as they stared out at the sea. When their eyes met, they saw the unease in each other's eyes, but no one spoke. This silence was a tradition on Ronan Island. When faced with the unknown brought by the sea, the islanders were accustomed to keeping quiet, as if not speaking of something would make it disappear. The younger generation, however, seemed unusually irritable. Tom, carrying crates at the pier, suddenly slammed a wooden box on the ground and cursed the weather. The sound of iron being struck in the village blacksmith shop was louder and more violent than usual. Ellis's granddaughter Mara was squatting at the door of their house sorting specimens. She was the only young person on the island who had studied on the mainland, majoring in natural science, and loved collecting seashells, minerals, and plants from the island. Now she frowned, pressing her temples with her fingers, and when she saw Ellis return, she complained, "Grandpa, my head has been buzzing these days, and I can't sleep well at night. I have strange dreams, all of waves and stones." Ellis didn't respond. He just walked into the storage room and pulled out a dusty wooden box. Opening it, he found a yellowed sheepskin book with brittle pages, written in a twisted script. That was the ancient dialect of Ronan Island, and now only Ellis could barely read it on the entire island. He stroked the rough parchment, and a faint vibration came through his fingertips, as if responding to the hum from the sea. When night fell, the hum disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared. But Ellis knew this was not the end. He sat by the fireplace, watching Mara write in her diary under the lamp, her brows still furrowed. Ellis remembered when Mara was a child. She had pestered him to tell her stories about the triangle stone, and he had only said, "It's a stone that protects the island," but never dared to say more. Now, he suddenly felt that perhaps it was time for the girl to know something. "Mara," he said, his voice hoarse, "do you remember where your great-grandmother's grave is?" Mara looked up, confused. "Beside the stone circle on North Beach, why?" "Let's go see it tomorrow," Ellis said. "And take a walk on North Beach." Mara nodded, though she didn't understand. She looked at her grandfather's weathered profile, and in the flickering firelight, his wrinkles seemed to hold countless secrets. She had always felt that her grandfather, like the island itself, hid many stories she didn't know, stories about the sea and stones that were ignored by her science textbooks. That night, Mara had another dream. There were no waves in the dream, only an endless darkness, and from the darkness came a deep hum, as if something huge was breathing there. She tried to run, but found her feet nailed to the ground. Looking down, she saw cold stone covered with delicate lines, like the veins of some creature. On the first foggy night of October, the sea fog was as thick as undiluted milk. Fisherman Billy was woken by the cold. His small fishing boat was anchored at the abandoned pier on North Beach, a place no one had used for decades because of the many reefs, except for Billy, who occasionally went there to mend nets for peace and quiet. The fog was too cold in the middle of the night, and he pulled his blanket tightly around him, about to fall asleep again when he heard a thump, thump sound outside, as if something was stepping on the reefs. "Who's there?" Billy called out, but there was no response. North Beach was remote, and few people came there besides him. He picked up the harpoon beside him, summoned his courage, and lifted the curtain of the cabin. The fog was so thick that visibility was less than 2 meters. He could only see the outline of the nearby reefs and the slippery sand under his feet. The thumping sound had stopped, leaving only the gentle lapping of waves on the shore. Billy cursed his cowardice and was about to go back to sleep when he tripped over something. Bending down to feel around, he touched a handful of fine powder, cold like metal shavings. Curiosity overcame sleepiness, and he lit the kerosene lamp he carried with him. The dim light pierced the thick fog, illuminating the beach in front of him, and there, right beside his fishing boat, was a row of footprints. The footprints were shaped like horse hooves, but wider with sharp edges, as if carved out of metal. Most eerily, each footprint glowed with a faint silver sheen, and scattered around each one was the same silver powder he had just touched. Billy squatted down, dipped his finger in some powder, and held it up to the light. The powder was as fine as dust, yet it sparkled with tiny glimmers in the lamplight. He followed the direction of the footprints, which stretched deep into North Beach toward the triangle stone, eventually disappearing into the thick fog. Billy's heart began to race, and he suddenly remembered the ghost stories the elderly on the island told, about shipwrecked sailors, fishermen swallowed by the sea, and devils appearing on foggy nights. He jumped up suddenly, forgetting his fishing nets entirely, and stumbled back to the village. Early the next morning, Billy's experience spread across the island. The islanders flocked to North Beach, staring at the silver-glowing hoof prints and chattering among themselves. "It's the devil. The devil must have come ashore." The baker's wife clutched her chest, her face ashen. "I've always said the triangle stone is an evil thing, and now we're being punished." "Nonsense," retorted old fisherman Mike. "It's the spirits of the shipwrecked looking for replacements. A cargo ship sank nearby last month, It must be their ghosts. Mara was also in the crowd. She squatted down and examined the footprints carefully with a magnifying glass she carried with her. The footprints were deep and had neat edges, not naturally formed. She picked up a pinch of silver powder with tweezers and smelled it. There was no odor. "This might be some kind of mineral," she said to the people around her. "Perhaps it's or from the seabed washed ashore and stepped on by some animal." "An animal? What animal could leave such large hoof prints that glow with metal?" someone retorted. Mara was lost for words. She really couldn't explain it. The largest animal on the island was goats, whose hooves were nothing like this, let alone glowing with a metallic sheen. At that moment, she saw her grandfather Ellis standing alone on the edge of the crowd, not speaking, just staring silently at the footprints with a complex look in his eyes. Mara walked over and asked softly, "Grandpa, what do you think?" Ellis didn't answer. He just took her hand and led her to a secluded reef. He pulled a small paper bag from his pocket and handed it to her. "Look at this." Mara opened the bag and found some silver powder, exactly the same as the powder beside the footprints. "I found this beside the triangle stone yesterday morning," Ellis said. "A day earlier than Billy." Mara looked at her grandfather in surprise. "You knew about this all along?" Ellis nodded, pulled a small glass jar from his arms, and poured the powder into it. In the sunlight, the powder suddenly began to glow faintly, flowing slowly inside the jar like a living thing. Mara's eyes widened. She had studied countless minerals, but had never seen anything like this. It was neither metal nor ore, but more like some kind of biological secretion. "Come with me," Ellis said, turning and walking toward the village church. Mara followed him, her heart filled with doubts. The church was the oldest building on the island, housing many ancient books and records. The old priest was sorting through the bookshelves, and when he saw Ellis enter, he nodded as if he had been waiting for him. "You've come to ask about the 1632 record, haven't you?" the old priest said, taking a thick leather-bound book from the top shelf, its pages yellowed and blackened with age. "I remembered it last night. It's recorded in this Chronicles of Ronan Island." Ellis took the book, flipped to the page marked with a bookmark, and handed it to Mara. Mara looked down and read the Old English. "Autumn of 1632, thick fog persisted for 7 days. Silver hooves appeared on the stone beach of North Beach, shaped like horse hooves, glowing with cold light. The triangle stone moved 3 zhong from east to west, leaving silver powder beneath it, and no one witnessed the process. For the following 3 months, the fishing grounds were abundant, and no storms invaded." Mara's fingers traced the yellowed page, and her heart skipped a beat. 1632. Over 400 years ago, almost the exact same thing had happened. Silver hoof prints, silver powder, the movement of the triangle stone. This could not be a coincidence. "What's going on here?" She looked up at Ellis, her voice trembling with a hint of panic. She didn't notice herself. Ellis sighed. "Mara, some things aren't meant to be explained by science. Like the sea, the island, and that stone. They are far older than we can imagine." That afternoon, Mara locked herself in her room and pored over all the books she had brought from the mainland: geology, biology, oceanography, even folklore. She tried to find cases similar to Ronan Island, but found nothing. The silver powder, the metal hoof prints, and the 400-year-old record hung over her like a fog. In the evening, she heard her grandfather's voice outside the door, seemingly arguing with the old priest. She quietly opened the door a crack and saw the old priest waving his arms excitedly. "Ellis, you can't keep hiding the truth. The islanders are panicking. They need to know what's happening. Now is not the time." Ellis's voice was calm. "Mara isn't ready, and neither are the others. Panic won't solve anything. It will only make things worse. Then when will it be time? When the triangle stone disappears or when disaster strikes?" the old priest demanded. Ellis fell silent for a moment, then said, "When the fog fire appears." Fog fire? Mara frowned. She had never heard the term before. Just then, Ellis seemed to sense something and turned to look at the door. Mara quickly closed it, leaning against it with her heart pounding. She knew that her grandfather and the old priest were hiding a great secret about Ronan Island. A secret closely linked to the triangle stone, the hoof prints, and the upcoming fog fire. That night, the hum returned, clearer and more persistent than before. Mara lay in bed, listening to the deep vibration, unable to fall asleep. She got up and walked to the window, looking toward North Beach. The sea fog was thickening again, like a sheet of silver silk under the moonlight. Suddenly, she saw a faint glow flash in the fog. Not lamplight, nor moonlight, but a pale blue, flickering light. Mara's heart tightened. She grabbed her coat and flashlight and rushed out of the house. She had a feeling that the fog fire her grandfather had spoken of was about to appear. Mara ran along the coastal path toward North Beach, the sea breeze carrying heavy moisture that stung her cheeks. The beam of her flashlight could only illuminate a small area in the thick fog, and the surrounding reefs loomed like silent giants. The closer she got to North Beach, the clearer the low-frequency hum became. The vibration traveled up through the ground, making the pebbles under her feet tremble slightly. Suddenly, she saw a pale blue flame rising from the sea fog ahead. The flame was low, burning close to the sea surface, without the crackle of dancing flames or any heat. Even when Mara stood 10 meters away, she felt no warmth at all. The color of the flame was strange, a nearly transparent pale blue, as if the color of the night sky had been crushed and scattered in the sea fog. It burned silently, swaying gently with the movement of the fog, as if it were alive. Mara raised her flashlight, trying to see the area around the flame, but found that the light was absorbed as soon as it got close, unable to penetrate at all. She could only faintly make out something moving on the sea surface around the flame, forming huge shadows. Just then, she suddenly felt dizzy, and the scene in front of her began to distort. The fog fire grew larger and brighter, eventually filling her entire field of vision. In the pale blue glow, she saw blurry images. A group of people wearing animal skins and stone masks dancing around the triangle stone. Their movements were stiff and bizarre, and they chanted some unintelligible incantation. Beside the triangle stone stood a huge creature, its body wrapped in thick fog, only a few thick, scaly limbs and a pair of glowing pale blue eyes visible. The people placed fish, fruits, and livestock in front of the triangle stone, as if performing some kind of sacrifice. "Mara! Mara!" An urgent shout pulled Mara back to reality. She suddenly came to her senses and found herself walking toward the fog fire, only a few steps away from stepping into the cold sea. Ellis stood beside her, pulling her arm tightly, his face pale. "What were you doing?" Ellis's voice trembled. Mara gasped for breath, her heart pounding. I saw some images, our ancestors, and something huge." Ellis's eyes darkened. He didn't speak, just pulled her back toward the village. "Don't come to see the fog fire alone again," he said. "It causes hallucinations and makes people lose their way." That night's experience completely shattered Mara's perceptions. She couldn't explain the hallucinations with science. Those clear, ancient images didn't feel like a dream, but more like the transmission of some kind of memory. She began to doubt everything she had learned in the past, wondering if this seemingly ordinary island really hid secrets beyond comprehension. Over the next 2 days, the fog fire appeared every night at North Beach as scheduled. More and more people saw it, and some, like Mara, had hallucinations in the firelight. Some saw their deceased relatives, some saw sunken ships, and others saw an endless deep sea filled with countless glowing creatures swimming. The islanders' panic reached its peak. Some began packing their belongings, wanting to leave Ronan Island, but found that all ships were unable to sail. Huge whirlpools had suddenly appeared on the sea, and the wind and waves had become extremely violent. Any ship attempting to leave would be capsized by the waves. "The stone god is angry," the old priest shouted to the islanders in the church. "We have offended the stone god that guards the island, and it is punishing us. We must hold a sacrifice to beg for its forgiveness." The islanders responded eagerly, preparing a large number of offerings and gathering around the triangle stone, wanting to hold a sacrificial ceremony. Mara tried to stop them. "This is just a natural phenomenon. Sacrifices won't solve anything." But no one listened to her. Fear had clouded people's reason. Ellis stood silently in the crowd, watching everything. When the old priest raised the sacrificial dagger, ready to slit the goat's throat, Ellis finally spoke. "Stop!" His voice was not loud, but it carried an authority that made everyone freeze. Ellis walked up to the triangle stone and reached out to gently touch its surface. "It is not a god," Ellis said, "nor will it accept your sacrifices. What it needs is not offerings, but understanding." Mara looked at her grandfather in surprise. It was the first time she had seen him directly contradict the islanders' beliefs. Ellis turned to face Mara, his eyes firm. "Mara, come here." Mara walked over, and Ellis took her hand and placed it on the triangle stone. The moment her hand touched the stone, Mara felt a warm sensation. Not the coldness of stone, but the temperature of a living creature. She looked down and saw that the dark gray surface of the triangle stone had suddenly revealed delicate lines, like the veins of a living being, glowing faintly under the moonlight. Even more eerily, she could feel the stone throbbing slightly, steady and powerful like a human heartbeat. How is this possible?" Mara's voice trembled. Granite was an inanimate object. How could it have temperature and a heartbeat? "It was never just an ordinary stone," Ellis said. "It is an anchor, a link between us and the shepherd." "Who exactly is the shepherd?" Mara finally asked the question that had been lingering in her mind. Ellis took a deep breath, as if making a decision. "Come home with me," he said. "I'll tell you everything." That night, Ellis led Mara into the family's old house. The attic had not been visited in a long time, covered in dust and cobwebs. Ellis moved a heavy wooden box, revealing a loose floorboard. He lifted the floorboard and pulled out something wrapped in animal skin. Unwrapping the skin, he revealed a thick sheepskin book, different from the one Ellis had taken out earlier. On the cover of this book was carved a strange pattern, a giant squid-like creature with horse-like hooves, coiled around a triangular stone. "This is our family's legacy," Ellis said. "It records the truth about Ronan Island and the triangle stone." Mara took the sheepskin book, and a sense of ancient mystery washed over her as her fingers touched the rough cover. She flipped through the pages, which were filled with dense writing in the ancient dialect of Ronan Island, along with simple illustrations, depicting the island, the triangle stone, and that giant squid-hoofed creature. "What does it say?" Mara asked. Ellis sat down beside her and began to speak slowly. A story of an ancient pact, a deep-sea being, and symbiosis. Mara listened quietly, her eyes growing wider and wider. She felt as if she had opened a door to an unknown world, behind which lay truths she had never imagined. A long, long time ago, Ronan Island was not an island. Ellis's voice, full of the weight of years, echoed in the dim attic. At that time, in this part of the North Atlantic, there lived an ancient being that our ancestors called the deep-diving shepherd. They were enormous, feeding on silicious minerals deep in the seabed, and their backs were covered with thick calcified layers. Over time, these layers accumulated, forming the original Ronan Island. Mara's fingers tightened around the sheepskin book. She could barely imagine that the island she had lived on for 20 years was actually the back of some creature. "What about the triangle stone?" The triangle stone is the tip of the shepherd's tentacle, Ellis said. The shepherd needs its tentacles to absorb energy from the seawater and to stabilize the calcified layers on its back, our island. To make the tentacles work better, the shepherd hardens the tips, forming a stone-like structure. That is the triangle stone. Mara thought back to the temperature and throbbing of the triangle stone, finally understanding. It was not a stone at all, but a biological limb. What is our relationship with the shepherd? A symbiotic relationship. Ellis's tone was heavy. Our ancestors were caught in a storm at sea and were rescued by the shepherd, who carried them to the calcified layers on its back. The ancestors found that the climate here was mild and resources abundant, so they settled down. And the shepherd also needed the ancestors' help. Its tentacles would sometimes get entangled in fishing nets or hit by human ships, and the ancestors would help clear obstacles from its tentacles and protect the triangle stone from damage. So, our ancestors made a pact with the shepherd. We would guard its tentacles, and it would carry our home, shield us from storms, and bring us abundant fishing grounds. So when grandfather said, "The shepherd is hungry," he meant the shepherd needs energy? Mara asked. Ellis nodded. When the shepherd lacks energy or its living environment is threatened, it emits a low-frequency hum, a signal to us. The hoof prints are traces left by the shepherd's supporting legs. The shepherd usually keeps these legs hidden under its body, only extending them above the sea surface to step on the beach when it needs to move its tentacles or adjust its position. The tips of the supporting legs are covered with a siliceous hardened layer, which is why they glow with a metallic sheen. The silver powder is debris from the wear and tear of this hardened layer. Mara finally understood. All the bizarre phenomena that had puzzled her had a reasonable explanation, even if it was beyond the scope of science. But one question remained in her mind. What about the fog fire and the hallucinations? The fog fire is a bioelectric reaction produced when the shepherd activates its tentacles, Ellis said. When the shepherd's tentacles absorb energy, they release bioelectricity, which reacts with methane gas in the seawater to form the pale blue flame. The hallucinations are fragments of memories transmitted by the shepherd through low-frequency sound waves. It passes on its own experiences and the stories of our ancestors, reminding us of the pact. After listening to Ellis's story, Mara fell silent for a long time. Her scientific knowledge told her that none of this was possible. How could a creature be large enough to carry an island? How could it make a pact with humans? But the throbbing of the triangle stone, the strange properties of the silver powder, the hallucinations in the fog fire, and the 400-year-old record all continued to confirm the truth of this story. "I need time to process this," Mara said, standing up and walking out of the attic. She wandered aimlessly along the seaside, the sea breeze blowing through her hair, clearing her confused thoughts slightly. Looking at the sea in front of her, she suddenly felt extremely unfamiliar. This sea she had seen all her life hid such a huge and mysterious being in its depths. In the days that followed, Mara began to observe the triangle stone again. She no longer confined her perceptions to scientific frameworks, but looked at it from a completely new perspective. She discovered that the lines on the triangle stone changed with the rhythm of the waves, becoming clearer at high tide and fainter at low tide. Its temperature also changed with the weather, warm on sunny days and cold on rainy ones. She also found that many phenomena on the island could be explained by Ellis's story. Why were Ronan Island's fishing grounds always more abundant than elsewhere? Because the shepherd's excrement was rich in nutrients, nourishing marine life. Why did Ronan Island rarely suffer from severe storms? Because the shepherd would adjust its position to shield the island. Why did the islanders have an innate reverence for the sea? Because this reverence was etched in their genes, a memory passed down from their ancestors. But deep in her heart, Mara still had a trace of doubt. She wanted to find more direct evidence of the shepherd's existence. So she made a decision to go to the triangle stone at night with the instruments she had brought from the mainland to measure its energy reactions. That night, the sea fog was thicker than usual, and the hum was clearer. Mara carried her instruments and quietly left the house. She avoided the patrolling islanders and walked all the way to North Beach. The triangle stone stood silently under the moonlight, the lines on its surface glowing faintly, as if welcoming her arrival. Mara placed the instruments beside the triangle stone and pressed the switch. The instruments began to emit a soft beeping sound, and a string of complex data appeared on the screen. There was a strong energy fluctuation inside the triangle stone, and the frequency of the fluctuation exactly matched the low-frequency hum she had recorded earlier. Just then, the triangle stone suddenly throbbed violently, and the lines on its surface became extremely bright. Mara looked up in surprise and saw pale blue light shining from inside the stone, as if something was flowing within it. Following the light, she saw a huge shadow appear under the sea surface, moving slowly in the water, its outline becoming clearer and clearer. It was a huge, wrinkled body, with several thick tentacles extending from it, the tips of which glowed with pale blue light, echoing the lines on the triangle stone. Mara's heart almost jumped out of her chest. She had finally seen it with her own eyes, part of the deep-diving shepherd. Just as she was about to get closer to the sea to get a better look, she suddenly felt a cold sensation under her feet. Looking down, she gasped. The ground beside her feet had a fresh, silver-glowing hoof print, and she hadn't felt a thing when she stood there. At that moment, the low-frequency hum suddenly grew louder. Mara felt dizzy, and hallucinations appeared before her eyes again. But this time, the hallucinations were different. She didn't see her ancestors' sacrifice, but the shepherd's memories. Swimming in the deep sea, surrounded by glowing jellyfish and giant whales. On its back, her ancestors worked diligently, fishing, farming, building houses. It repelled incoming storms with its tentacles and shielded the island from tsunamis with its body. When Mara came to her senses again, the sky was already dawning. The triangle stone had returned to calm, and the shadow under the sea had disappeared, leaving only the fresh hoof print to prove that everything the night before was not a dream. She packed up her instruments and hurried back home. Ellis was already waiting at the door. Seeing her return, he didn't scold her, just handed her a cup of hot milk. "Did you see it all?" Ellis asked. Mara nodded, taking the milk, her hands still trembling slightly. It's even larger and older than I imagined. It has lived in these waters for hundreds of thousands of years, Ellis said. It has witnessed the changes of the sea and the rise and fall of humanity. We are just passers-by in its life, but this pact has bound us closely to it. Mara took a sip of hot milk, and the warm liquid flowed down her throat, calming her chaotic emotions slightly. Looking at her grandfather's old face, she suddenly understood the meaning of being a stonekeeper. It was not about guarding a stone, but guarding a memory, a pact with an ancient being, and the survival hope of all Ronan Island. "Grandpa," Mara looked up, her eyes firm, "I want to know what we can do now. The shepherd is in danger, isn't it?" Ellis smiled with relief and nodded. "Yes, it is. And this danger is related to us humans." Ellis told Mara that in recent years, global warming had caused the Arctic glaciers to melt continuously, leading to a decrease in the salinity of the surface seawater in the North Atlantic. The deep-diving shepherd was extremely sensitive to seawater salinity, and the change had disrupted its living environment, making it unable to absorb energy normally. It had to readjust the position of its tentacles, the triangle stone, to adapt to the new environment. Otherwise, it would die and Ronan Island would sink into the sea along with it. "So the hum and the supporting legs are all preparations for moving the triangle stone?" Mara asked. "That's right," Ellis said. "The same thing happened over 400 years ago. A large-scale change in ocean salinity occurred, and the shepherd adjusted the position of the triangle stone, allowing Ronan Island to survive. Now, history is repeating itself." Mara frowned. "But the islanders don't know the truth yet. They're still panicking and holding sacrifices. If the shepherd really moves the triangle stone, they'll definitely think it's a disaster and might do something impulsive. So we need to tell them the truth, Ellis said. But it won't be easy. For a long time, the islanders' fear of the unknown has been deeply rooted. Whether they can accept this truth beyond comprehension remains to be seen. Mara fell silent. She knew her grandfather was right, but she also knew that the islanders had to understand. Otherwise, when the triangle stone disappeared, the panicked people might do something to break the pact, endangering not only the shepherd but the entire Ronan Island. "I'll convince them," Mara suddenly said. "I'm the only person on the island with a higher education. Maybe they'll be willing to listen to me. Besides, I've seen the shepherd with my own eyes. I can use my experiences and the data from the scientific instruments to make them believe." Ellis looked at Mara, pride filling his eyes. "Good," he said. "Grandpa believes in you. But remember, don't force them to accept it. Let them understand on their own that this pact is based on reverence and trust, not fear." The next day, Mara gathered all the islanders in the village square. She told them everything, her experiences, the records in the sheepskin book, and the data from the scientific instruments. She also showed them the silver powder, demonstrating how it glowed and flowed in the sunlight, as well as the biological lines on the surface of the triangle stone. The islanders reacted differently. Some looked skeptical, some more panicked, and some of the elderly had thoughtful expressions, as if they had heard similar legends from their ancestors. "You're saying we live on the back of a monster?" the baker's wife screamed. "That's absurd. I refuse to believe it." "It's not a monster," Mara said calmly. "It's our guardian. It carries our home and brings us abundant fishing grounds. Over 400 years ago, it adjusted the position of the triangle stone, saving us from disaster. Now it's doing it again, to ensure our home continues to exist." "What will happen to us if the triangle stone disappears?" someone asked. "The triangle stone won't disappear. It will just move to a new location," Mara said. "The shepherd will relocate its tentacles, just as it did over 400 years ago. Moreover, it will leave a new anchor to continue guarding our island." Just then, old fisherman Mike stepped forward. "I believe Mara," he said. "My grandfather once told me that when he was a child, the triangle stone was in a different position. At that time, the elderly said the stone god had moved on its own. Now I realize Mara is telling the truth." With Mike's support, more and more islanders began to waver. The old priest also stepped forward. "The records in the chronicles of Ronan Island exactly match what Mara said. Perhaps we have always misunderstood the meaning of the stone god. It is not a god, but a symbiotic partner." Seeing more and more people starting to accept the truth, Mara breathed a sigh of relief. She knew it would take time to convince everyone, but at least they had taken the first step. What they needed to do next was wait for the shepherd to complete its migration and for a new balance to be established. And Mara also knew that her life would change completely from this moment on. She was no longer just a college student who only believed in science, but one of Ronan Island's guardians and an heir to the ancient pact. Her duty was to guard this truth, this island, and the symbiotic relationship with the deep-diving shepherd. Convincing the islanders was easier than Mara had imagined. Perhaps it was because of the hallucinations from the fog fire, the 400-year-old record, or their love for the island. More and more people began to accept the existence of the deep-diving shepherd and the ancient symbiotic pact. The old priest copied many copies of the Chronicles of Ronan Island and distributed them to the islanders. Mike organized fishermen to patrol the seaside, preventing anyone from disturbing the shepherd out of curiosity or fear. Mara spent more time recording and passing on the knowledge. She documented the migration she had witnessed that night, the energy data of the new triangle stone, and the memory fragments transmitted by the shepherd, writing them down in notebooks in both the islands. Dialect and mainland language, fearing that this truth would be lost to time. Tommy and the other village children became her little assistants, helping her observe the changes of the new triangle stone every day and drawing the glowing plankton with crayons. In their drawings, the shepherd was no longer a strange monster, but a gentle island daddy with a soft outline. Peace was broken a month later. A steamship flying the flag of a mainland scientific expedition slowly entered Ronan Island's waters. The captain stood on the deck, looking at the new triangle stone on the island with excitement through a telescope. They had heard rumors from nearby fishermen about a glowing strange stone on Ronan Island and had come specifically to investigate. This is definitely a rare bioclastic rock containing special luminescent minerals, the expedition's geologist exclaimed as soon as he stepped onto North Beach, rushing toward the new triangle stone with a hammer in his hand. Just a sample will cause a sensation in the geological community. Stop! Mara stepped forward quickly, blocking his path. She handed him her notebook, which contained detailed records of the triangle stone's biological characteristics, text, data, and illustrations. The geologist initially dismissed it, but when he saw the energy fluctuation curves recorded by the instruments and the pulse data that exactly matched a biological heartbeat, his brows furrowed. That's impossible. How can a rock have biological characteristics? He muttered. Just then, the new triangle stone suddenly trembled slightly, the lines on its surface glowing, and in the seawater around it, glowing plankton gathered into a band of light, flowing slowly around the stone. The members of the scientific expedition were stunned, and the instruments in their hands beeped, displaying strong bioelectric signals on the screens. Instead of directly refuting, Mara led them into the church and took out the Chronicles of Ronan Island and the family's sheepskin book. Over 400 years ago, it moved once, and the island enjoyed 3 years of abundance afterward. Now, due to climate change caused by humans, it has migrated again, just to continue carrying our home. She pointed to the calm sea outside the window. What you see is not a strange stone, but proof of the pact between us and the deep-sea being. The scientific expedition stayed on the island for a week. Instead of trying to collect samples, they used more sophisticated instruments to monitor the energy changes of the new triangle stone and record the abundance data of the fishing grounds. On the day they left, the captain shook Mara's hand and said, "We will announce this ecological wonder to the outside world, but we will omit the specific location of the triangle stone. Some beings are worthy of being guarded with reverence." One late autumn day, Ellis called Mara to the attic of the old house. He handed her the glass jar containing the silver powder, which now glowed softly as it mingled with a ray of sunlight. The duty of a stonekeeper is never to guard a stone, but to guard this connection. Ellis's voice was hoarse but extremely firm. "Now it's time to pass this on to you." Mara took the glass jar, and a faint vibration came from the powder, as if resonating with her heartbeat. She walked to the attic window and looked toward North Beach. The new triangle stone glowed warmly in the setting sun, and Tommy was leading a group of children, arranging small stones in a circle beside it, a symbol of the pact recorded in the sheepskin book. That night, Mara had a peaceful dream. There was no darkness or strange hum in the dream, only a clear blue deep sea. The deep-diving shepherd swam slowly in the water, its tentacles gently brushing the sea surface, stirring up ripples on which sat her ancestors and the islanders, all smiling. When the shepherd's light-sensitive area turned toward her, Mara clearly felt a warm emotion, like trust spanning 10,000 years. When she woke up, the sky was already bright. Mara walked to the desk, opened a new notebook, and wrote on the title page, "Ronan Island is not land floating on the sea, but the spine of the shepherd. The triangle stone is not a cold rock, but an anchor of symbiosis. We guard it, and it carries us. This pact shall last as long as the sea." She picked up her grandfather's brass telescope and walked to the hillside outside the house. Through the telescope, she saw seagulls circling over the sea beside the new triangle stone, and fishermen's boats with white sails heading toward the abundant fishing grounds. The sun shone on the sea, sparkling with light, and deep in the distant sea, that huge and ancient being was breathing and throbbing along with the island, continuing the 10,000-year symbiotic legend. The salt in the wind still carried a chill, but it was no longer as sharp as a knife. Mara knew that as long as this pact endured and the faith of guardianship remained unshaken, the story of Ronan Island would continue to flow like the waves of the North Atlantic, forever.